lifting family, welcome back. This video is going to be about a bench press setup as far as the different things that I go through and the different cues that I've learned to make sure that I get a proper bench press setup and to be able to make sure that you're maintaining tightness and you're maintaining good form while you bench press. A lot of the things that happen are people mainly focus on moving just the bar, but there's a lot more to it than that. So as far as a bench press setup goes, generally some people will start off at the beginning, the front of the bench, so they'll start to line up their toes, and what they're doing here is you're kind of figuring out your spot where you're going to start so that when you lay back on the bench, you can get the proper arch that you need. You're able to make sure that you get your feet set first so that everything begins to engage after that. That worked for a while for me, but what has worked better for me is that I line the top of my head up with the top of the bench. So when I lay back, I make sure that my head, that's the first thing that I check on, is make sure that my head lines up with the top of the bench. So sometimes you might see me do this, and that's me essentially checking the top of my head to make sure that I'm lining up the bench. So as I lay back, that's my first step. Right here is my head touch, and then I'll start to get tightness in my upper back, and basically you're trying to pull your shoulder blades together as tight as possible, and then I find my grip, and what I do is I try to straighten my arm out, and it's easier when there's weight on the bar to be able to do this to maintain tightness. And then I'm doing the same on the other side, trying to straighten my arm out to get as much tightness as possible. So essentially what I'm doing when I'm laying back is I'm finding my grip, and then I'm pushing out to be able to pull the shoulder blade back. And then I do the same with the other side, so that with the bench being on a normal gym bench, it's very difficult to be able to maintain tightness on a normal gym bench. So some people might use like these Elite FTS bands or some sort of resistance band that you can strap over the bench to help maintain that tightness, because a lot of the commercial benches are very slippery. So I tend to straighten out my arms to help lock my one shoulder in place, and then I'll do the same for the other side, and I'm pushing with my arm to help force my shoulder back. And so I'm at this point. And then at this point, once you engage, you're going to start to bring the barbell out of the rack. And this is, when you're bringing the barbell out of the rack, essentially what you're trying to do is it's good to do it with a pullover, and you can even try to do it with the barbell to try to practice the movement, but you are essentially using your lats to pull that bar out. And you still want to make sure that you maintain tightness. So if the rack is too low for you and you're having to push up, during that press you might lose a lot of upper back tightness. So it's very hard to maintain tightness if you cannot get the proper rack set up, or especially at a normal gym where you're not really benching in a rack. You're benching on a bench press setup that is already predetermined as far as the bench press height, as far as the rack height. So when you bring the barbell out, essentially what's happening here is that you're trying to maintain upper back tightness. And the other thing you can try to do is when you are, just before you bring the barbell out, you could essentially, you're pushing out or you're pulling out on the bar. So think of like stretching a rubber band. That's essentially what's happening. You're trying to kind of pull out on that bar to try to really help make sure that all that tightness stays, so that you're really trying to engage your rear delts, really trying to engage your lats and your upper back muscles to make sure that you maintain that tightness. And then at that point, after all of those steps, you finally start to lower that bar down. But the other thing that happens here is that if people lose upper back tightness, or they have a weak spot maybe off of their chest, you'll start to see them as they bring the barbell down, right at about midpoint, all of a sudden to try to get this reactive motion, they will completely lose tightness and they'll speed down to their chest. They'll extremely lower the weight extremely fast down to their chest to try to get a pop off of the chest. In terms of powerlifting, that's not going to work because you have to pause. That's part of the pause. So essentially you're becoming a loaded spring, and that's the idea here, that when you are loading up that spring, you touch your chest, get the bar even, flat, not moving, and then power through. So if you were to accelerate from midpoint down your chest and try to pop it off of your chest, you're trying to gain momentum and you're really putting a lot of pressure on your sternum, which is bad. But again, so when you get your feet set, going way back into the bench press setup, with getting your feet set, what you're trying to do is, once you get your feet set, no matter how your bench press setup is, once you get your feet set, you're trying to push your feet out as if you're trying to slide them on the floor. So if you were trying to, sorry for my feet, but you're trying to slide that foot forward almost, except for you don't want your foot to slide. You want it to kind of lock in place and then press. You should really feel that in your quad. You should be able to feel your quad kind of activate a little bit as you're trying to push your feet out. And essentially what you're doing is that's part of leg drive. You're trying to drive yourself back into the bench. With that leg drive, you're able to kind of pull your shoulder blades in, you're able to pull your chest up, and you're able to stay there. And that's why your legs should be tight during the movement. Somebody should be able to, when they come up and push your leg, it should be almost as tight as possible to be able to not move your legs while you're doing the bench press. Your legs shouldn't be loose, they should be somewhat stiff. And the first time that you get into a proper bench press setup, especially for a powerlifting bench, it shouldn't feel comfortable. It's not going to feel comfortable. You have this mega arch that's going on, or at least an arch that's beyond what you're used to doing. So it's not going to be a comfortable setup, but it will get comfortable. Alright, lifting family, so you've seen how I do all my steps with the bench press. Now I'm going to show you my full bench press setup, from how I set my feet to how I engage the bar to how I lift it off to an actual lift. So here's essentially my full steps. I had a habit of doing this, as I said before, where I kind of set my feet first. So I just kind of, mine's usually about 4 inches back, but it doesn't matter because that's not how I set my feet. Checking for head placement. Properly centered on the bench. Make sure the bar is rolled forward. Center the bar on the rack. Begin adjusting my shoulder blades and pushing them tight. Feet up on the bench. Toes to the edge of the bench. Retuck my shoulder blades again. Engage my glutes. Set one foot. Set the other foot. Pushing out at the toes. Bring my butt down to the bench. Using my lats. Pulling the bar apart. Slowly coming down. Explode up. And there you have it. That's the full bench press setup, or at least my full bench press setup. A lot of cues to go over, but at the same time, for a big bench, there's going to be a lot of cues that you're going to need to go through. Thanks for watching. Thank you for all the support. Remember to hit that subscribe button. Any questions? Brandon at Liftingdad.com.